The champagne glass shattered against the first-class cabin floor as Imani Johnson stood frozen, her caramel skin burning with humiliation. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake," the blonde flight attendant Vanessa whispered with a venomous smile. "Someone of your size should be in economy. First-class seats aren't designed for people like you." The entire cabin fell silent. Little did Vanessa know, Imani wasn't just any passenger. She was the daughter of Marcus Johnson, who had just acquired Skylight Airlines yesterday. And this was supposed to be a routine flight inspection. Would this single moment of discrimination uncover a conspiracy larger than Imani could have ever imagined? Before we start this shocking journey, let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more stories that expose the truth. Imani Johnson clutched her designer handbag tighter as the eyes of every first-class passenger burned into her skin. At 29 years old, she had faced discrimination before, but never this public, never this humiliating. The champagne that now stained her carefully selected outfit was supposed to welcome her aboard, not become a weapon of shame. "I have a valid ticket," Imani said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions within. She had planned this inspection meticulously. As the daughter of Marcus Johnson, who had just acquired Skylight Airlines following reports of discriminatory practices, she wanted to experience the service firsthand before introducing herself to the staff. Vanessa Whitmore, the senior flight attendant with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes, looked down at Imani's ticket with exaggerated scrutiny. "Yes, but there must have been some mistake in booking. Our first-class accommodations have certain standards." She emphasized the last word while glancing pointedly at Imani's curvy figure. "I don't understand what the problem is," Imani replied, aware that the businessman beside her, who was both white and larger than her, had been welcomed aboard with champagne and warm smiles just minutes earlier. Vanessa's smile tightened. "The problem, ma'am, is passenger comfort. Your size might impede on the comfort of others in this section." She wasn't bothering to lower her voice anymore, ensuring everyone heard. "We have certain fitting requirements." The whispers started immediately. A gray-haired executive 2 rows ahead turned to stare. A woman in designer clothes poorly concealed a smirk behind her hand. The businessman who had been seated beside Imani suddenly became intensely interested in his phone, refusing to make eye contact. "I've flown first class dozens of times," Imani said, her professional training helping her maintain composure. "And I fit perfectly fine in these seats." "Perhaps on other airlines with lower standards," Vanessa replied sweetly, then signaled to a male flight attendant. "Brett, could you come assist with a seating issue?" Brett Coleman strode over, his broad shoulders and confident gait suggesting he was used to handling problems. He took one look at Imani, and his expression hardened. "What seems to be the issue?" "This passenger was mistakenly booked in first class," Vanessa explained, as if Imani weren't present. "I've explained our fitting policies, but she's being difficult." "I'm not being difficult," Imani countered, her voice still level, but firm. "And there's no mistake. I specifically booked first class." She noticed a heavy-set white woman across the aisle who had been treated with nothing but courtesy by the same flight attendants. Brett crossed his arms. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Imani handed it over, noting they hadn't requested to see it twice for any other passenger. She watched as Brett scrutinized it unnecessarily long, then shared a look with Vanessa. "Everything appears to be in order," he admitted reluctantly. "But if we determine there's a comfort issue once we're in flight, we'll need to relocate you." "What comfort issue?" Imani pressed. "I fit in the seat perfectly. The armrests go down completely." Vanessa's smile disappeared entirely. "Are you becoming confrontational, ma'am? We can't have disruptive passengers in first class." "Asking questions isn't being disruptive," Imani pointed out. "Your tone is inappropriate," Brett said, raising his voice slightly. "Now we can resolve this easily by moving you to economy where there's more space between rows, or we can escalate this situation. Your choice." Imani couldn't believe what was happening. "I paid for first class. I'm sitting in first class. Brett's jaw tightened. Security, he called out, motioning toward the front of the plane where an air marshal stood. We have an uncooperative passenger. Imani felt her heart rate spike. Uncooperative. I simply want the service I paid for. The air marshal approached, hand instinctively touching his waist. What's the problem here? No problem, Imani said quickly, recognizing how situations like this could escalate dangerously for someone who looked like her. This passenger is refusing to comply with crew member instructions, Vanessa interjected. We've asked her repeatedly to move to appropriate seating. I understand, the marshal said, not bothering to hear Imani's side. Ma'am, for everyone's safety and comfort, I need you to gather your belongings and move to where the crew directs you. Phones were out now. Several passengers were recording the encounter. Imani saw the social media storm brewing, how this would play out if she resisted. Angry black woman removed from flight. She had seen too many similar headlines not to understand the script being written for her. With all the dignity she could muster, Imani stood. I'll move, but I want your names and employee ID numbers, she said firmly. Vanessa's smile returned. Of course, we're just following company policies. The walk of shame to economy felt endless. Every step was a heartbeat of humiliation, every pair of eyes another needle of judgment. Passengers whispered behind raised hands, some filmed openly. A child pointed at her as she passed. What none of them knew, what Vanessa Whitmore with her dismissive eyes couldn't possibly realize, was that Imani Johnson wasn't just any passenger they could mistreat. She wasn't just the daughter of the airline's new owner. She was a woman with a doctorate in business ethics who had helped rebuild her father's empire precisely by identifying and eliminating discriminatory practices in the companies they acquired. And she had just decided this flight wouldn't be a routine inspection after all. It would be the beginning of a reckoning. As Imani settled into her cramped economy seat, she pulled out her notebook and made her first entry. May 15th, 2023. Discrimination Incident Number 1. She was going to document everything. Excuse me, would you like some water? The flight attendant serving economy class spoke softly, his expression conveying something beyond standard customer service. Imani looked up from her notebook, where she'd been documenting the humiliating first-class incident in precise detail. Thank you, she replied, accepting the cup. The flight attendant, Jeremiah, according to his name tag, hesitated before moving on. I'm sorry about what happened up front, he whispered, positioning his body to block the view from other crew members. That wasn't right. Imani studied him carefully. Does that happen often on this airline? Jeremiah glanced around nervously. I can't really talk about it openly, but... He slipped a napkin under her cup. My break is in 30 minutes if you want to continue this conversation. When Jeremiah returned, he sat in the empty seat beside her during a quiet moment in the service schedule. What happened to you was wrong, but it wasn't random, he said, his voice barely audible above the engine drone. There's a pattern, but nobody wants to talk about it. What kind of pattern? Imani asked, recording notes in her phone rather than her notebook now. Certain passengers get special treatment, Jeremiah explained, especially in premium cabins. It's never explicit in training, but the message is clear through who gets promoted and who gets sidelined. Has anyone reported this? Jeremiah's bitter laugh said everything. To who? HR is part of it. A flight attendant filed a complaint last year about discriminatory passenger treatment and was scheduled for all overnight shifts with minimum hours until she quit. So the airline systematically discourages certain types of people from flying first class? Imani clarified, her researcher's mind cataloging evidence. Skylight calls it maintaining our premium image, Jeremiah confirmed. Most crew members either participate or stay silent. Those of us who object, he gestured to his economy assignment. As Jeremiah shared more details, Imani's mind drifted to her father's journey. Marcus Johnson had risen from poverty in South Chicago to build MJ Enterprises, a business empire specializing in rehabilitating troubled companies. Growing up, Imani had watched him transform discriminatory corporate cultures while generating record profits. After earning her PhD in business ethics with a focus on corporate discrimination, Imani had joined her father's company, developing systems to identify and eliminate bias across their acquisitions. Her methodology had become renowned in business circles, though most people only recognized her last name, not her face. Skylight Airlines was their most recent acquisition, purchased specifically after multiple reports of discrimination that previous management had ignored. What Imani was experiencing wasn't just a one-off incident. It was precisely why her father had bought the airline. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "How's the inspection going? Your father's medical procedure went well. He's resting now." Imani hesitated, not wanting to worry her father during his recovery from heart valve surgery. She typed, "Still gathering information. Some concerns. We'll brief fully tomorrow." "Is there anything I should tell him?" came the response. "Just that I'm being thorough," Imani replied, putting her phone away. As she discussed more with Jeremiah, Imani was careful not to reveal her identity. She presented herself as a business consultant, interested in airline customer service practices. The more she learned, the more disturbed she became. This wasn't just a few bad employees. This was systematic. 2 hours into the flight, Imani got up to use the bathroom. As she waited in line, she noticed Vanessa hurrying from first class, phone in hand, face pale with panic. "Brett!" Vanessa hissed, grabbing the male flight attendant's arm. "We have a problem. I just saw the passenger manifest details. That woman, the one we moved to economy, I think she's Johnson's daughter." Brett's face drained of color. "Marcus Johnson, the new owner?" "Yes," Vanessa whispered frantically. "Her name is Imani Johnson. It has to be her." Imani ducked her head, pretending to search for something in her purse as Brett glanced down the aisle. "Are you sure?" Brett asked. "No, but we can't risk it," Vanessa replied. "We need to fix this. Before we land, Uncle Richard will kill us if we've created problems already." Brett nodded. "I'll get her some champagne. Upgrade her meal. Say it was a computer error." "Good," Vanessa agreed. "And delete the incident report I filed. Say she was being difficult. We both know how that plays with upper management." When Imani returned to her seat, sure enough, Brett appeared with a glass of champagne and a forced smile. "Ms. Johnson, we seem to have had a significant misunderstanding. We'd like to offer you this complimentary beverage as an apology." "Thank you," Imani said coolly, accepting the glass but making no move to drink it. What exactly was the misunderstanding? Brett's smile faltered. "Just a seating allocation error. Nothing intentional, I assure you." "Interesting," Imani noted. "It seemed quite intentional when your colleague said someone of my size doesn't belong in first class." "A regrettable choice of words," Brett backpedaled. "We'd be happy to reseat you in first class immediately." "I'm comfortable here now," Imani replied, watching his reaction. "But I'm curious, what changed? My size is the same as it was when I boarded." Brett's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing anger beneath the veneer. "As I said, it was an unfortunate misunderstanding. If you'd like to file a complaint, I can provide the appropriate form." "I'm sure you can," Imani replied, taking out her phone and making a visible note. Brett's eyes followed her movements nervously before he retreated. "They figured out who you are," Jeremiah whispered when he passed by again. "Not exactly," Imani replied. "They suspect, but they're not sure. And I want to see what else happens before they confirm it." "What's your take on this situation? Would you have revealed your identity immediately or stayed undercover to see how deep the discrimination goes? Comment 1 if you would have exposed your identity right away, or 2 if you would have done what Imani did and gathered more evidence first. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support stories that expose uncomfortable truths about discrimination in everyday places. Would the flight attendants try to cover their tracks, or would they double down? And what connections did they have to the former airline management? The rabbit hole goes deeper than anyone could have imagined. The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, causing the seatbelt sign to illuminate with a soft ding. Imani used this opportunity to stand quickly, grabbing her purse and heading toward the bathroom before the crew could enforce the seatbelt rule. She needed more information. And instinct told her Vanessa and Brett wouldn't be careful about their conversations during a chaotic moment. As passengers gripped their armrests through another bump of turbulence, Imani slipped into the narrow bathroom at the rear of the plane, leaving the door unlocked but closed. Through the thin partition, she could hear staff voices in the galley just behind her. "Uncle Richard is going to lose it when he hears about this," Vanessa's stressed voice filtered through. "We need to make sure our stories align." "Relax," Brett responded. "We don't even know if it's really her. Lots of people have the same last name." "How many Imani Johnsons do you think are flying first class the day after Marcus Johnson acquires the airline?" Vanessa snapped. "We need to get ahead of this. Call Thomas in corporate and have him check if there's any record of today's encounter in the system." "Already on it," Brett said. "He'll delete any incident reports and security footage before we land, but we should notify the rest of the elite Sky Group just in case." Imani's ears perked up at the unfamiliar term. She pulled out her phone silently and began recording. "Good idea," Vanessa agreed. "If she files a complaint, we need everyone on the same page. Standard procedure: she was aggressive, violated comfort guidelines, threatened staff when asked to comply with safety protocols." Brett's voice lowered. "Do you think she knows about the profiling system?" "Impossible," Vanessa replied confidently. "That's only accessible to elite Sky members. Uncle Richard made sure those databases are completely separate from regular airline systems." "What about the passenger who helped implement it? The one who works for that tech company? Mackenzie? He's loyal. He's been helping us maintain the premium image of Skylight for years. He wouldn't talk, especially since his algorithms are being
used by other premium services now." Imani felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about discriminatory treatment from a few flight attendants. This was organized, systematic, and technological.
"How many on this flight?" Brett asked. "4 flagged profiles in economy where they belong, and the Johnson woman who somehow ended up in first," Vanessa answered. "Remember the directive. Premium cabins are our showcase. They set passenger expectations and brand identity. The right passengers create the right atmosphere." Uncle Richard was smart with the wording, Brett chuckled. "Nothing explicitly about race or size, just premium image and passenger comfort. Completely defensible." "That's why he was COO for 15 years, Vanessa agreed. "He knew how to maintain standards without leaving evidence." Another bump of turbulence provided cover for Imani to exit the bathroom, her mind racing. Richard, presumably Richard Whitmore based on the connection to Vanessa, had been the chief operating officer of Skylight until her father's acquisition. And apparently, he had implemented a systematic passenger profiling system designed to discourage certain people from flying in premium cabins. As she made her way back to her seat, Jeremiah caught her eye and subtly motioned her toward the empty galley at mid-cabin. "I have something for you," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder before slipping her a small USB drive. "Passenger profile data, internal memos, the algorithm parameters. I've been collecting evidence for months." "Why are you giving me this?" Imani asked, carefully pocketing the drive. "Because I've seen too many people humiliated," Jeremiah replied. "The system flags passengers by race, weight, religious markers like hijabs, even accents noted by check-in staff. It assigns a premium suitability score. Low scores get discouraged from premium cabins through bad service, seating errors, or straight-up humiliation like what happened to you. And you documented all this?" Jeremiah nodded. "At first, I thought it was just a few racist flight attendants. Then I realized it was policy. Unofficial, unwritten policy with high-tech enforcement." Before he could continue, Brett appeared at the end of the galley, eyes narrowing as he spotted them. Together. "Everything okay here?" he asked, voice laced with suspicion. "Just getting a headache tablet for the passenger," Jeremiah improvised, reaching into a first aid kit. Brett's eyes darted between them. "Vanessa needs you in first class. I'll handle economy service." After Jeremiah left, Brett cornered Imani. "Making friends with the staff, Ms. Johnson? Or should I say Dr. Johnson? PhD in business ethics from Northwestern, right?" specializing in corporate discrimination cases. Imani maintained her composure. You've done your research. We do our homework on all our passengers, Brett replied with a cold smile. Especially those with connections. I hope Jeremiah wasn't bothering you with nonsense. He's new, still, learning our standards. He was perfectly professional, Imani countered, unlike some crew members I've encountered today. Brett's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. Misunderstandings happen, but I should warn you, Skylight has a long history, deep connections in the industry. Your father may own the company on paper, but there are operational realities he may not fully appreciate yet. The threat was thinly veiled. Imani held his gaze. I'm sure my father appreciates operational realities perfectly well. That's how he built a multi-billion-dollar business. Some businesses are different, Brett replied. Airlines have unique ecosystems, passenger expectations, brand identities built over decades. Interesting perspective, Imani said. I'll be sure to include it in my report. Brett's smile finally slipped. Report? Just gathering thoughts on my flight experience, Imani replied innocently. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to return to my seat. As she walked away, she heard Brett immediately pick up a phone. She couldn't hear what he said, but his urgent tone told her enough. Whatever Elite Sky was, they were now mobilizing against her. When she returned to her seat, she found Jeremiah being berated in the galley by Vanessa, who was jabbing a finger in his chest. Through the curtain, Imani could hear snippets, undermining company policy, and final warning. Jeremiah caught her eye as he emerged, giving her a nearly imperceptible nod. The message was clear. Be careful. For the remainder of the flight, Imani noticed Brett watching her constantly. When she used her phone, he would find reasons to walk past. When she spoke to other passengers, he hovered nearby. It was surveillance, plain and simple. As the captain announced their initial descent, Brett made a call from the rear galley, speaking in hushed tones. Imani could only catch fragments. Implement blacklist protocol and arrival gate 7. Whatever awaited her at the destination, Imani realized the discrimination she'd experienced was just the tip of a much larger, more organized system. Her father had purchased an airline with a cancer growing inside it, a malignant network dedicated to exclusion and discrimination, hiding behind corporate language about premium experiences and brand standards. And now that network was preparing to protect itself. The aircraft touched down with a slight bump, tires screeching against tarmac as passengers collectively exhaled. For most, arrival meant the end of their journey. For Imani Johnson, it was merely the beginning of a more dangerous one. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, she noticed Brett whispering to a flight attendant she hadn't seen before, both of them glancing in her direction. When passengers began to stand and collect their belongings, Imani deliberately took her time, watching as Brett positioned himself near the exit, phone in hand, texting rapidly. "Thank you for flying with us today," Vanessa announced over the intercom, her voice artificially cheerful. "Local time is 3:42 p.m. Please check your seats and overhead compartments for personal belongings. Certain passengers may be selected for additional security screening, which is completely random and routine." Imani caught Jeremiah's eye as he passed. He mouthed silently, "Be careful." When she finally moved toward the exit, Brett's smile was predatory. "Enjoy your stay, Ms. Johnson," he said, emphasizing her name just loud enough for nearby crew members to hear. The jetway felt unusually long, a gauntlet Imani walked with increasing trepidation. At the gate, nothing seemed amiss, until she entered the terminal and spotted 3 airport security officers scanning the deplaning passengers. Their eyes locked onto her immediately. "Ms. Johnson?" The lead officer approached, hand resting casually near his weapon. "We need you to come with us for additional screening." "May I ask why?" Imani inquired politely, aware that other passengers were watching. "Random selection," the officer replied mechanically. "Please follow us." "Of course, officer." Imani paused, looking at his badge. Davis, I'm happy to comply, though I am curious about the random selection process that identified me before I even entered the terminal. Officer Davis's expression tightened. This way, please. Rather than leading her to the standard security area, they escorted her through a service door and down a series of corridors, away from public view. The isolation raised immediate alarm bells in Imani's mind. She pulled out her phone, only to have Officer Davis reach for it. Phones are prohibited during special screening procedures. Imani clutched it tighter. I wasn't aware of that policy. I'd like to notify my assistant about a potential delay. You can do that after screening, a female officer insisted, holding out her hand. Phones can interfere with our equipment. Reluctantly, Imani handed it over, mentally cataloging every procedural irregularity for later documentation. They brought her to a small, windowless room with a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 uncomfortable-looking chairs. The setting felt more like an interrogation room than a security checkpoint. Place your belongings on the table, Officer Davis instructed. Everything needs to be thoroughly inspected. As Imani complied, the female officer began an unusually aggressive search of her carry-on, removing items and examining them with excessive scrutiny. She roughly handled Imani's laptop, nearly dropping it, and emptied her cosmetic bag onto the table, items scattering across the surface. Is that level of force necessary? Imani asked calmly. Ma'am, please refrain from interrupting the screening process, the third officer responded. The female officer held up Imani's notebook. What's this? My personal notes. The officer flipped through the pages, reading Imani's documentation of the flight discrimination. Her expression darkened. What exactly is your purpose for traveling today, Ms. Johnson? Business, Imani replied simply. What kind of business? Corporate consulting. Officer Davis leaned forward. We received information about a passenger exhibiting suspicious behavior. Apparently, you were unusually interested in staff operations, taking notes, asking probing questions about airline procedures. Imani maintained her composure. I wasn't aware that taking notes was suspicious behavior. Is there a specific regulation against it? Don't get smart, the female officer snapped. We're just doing our job. And what job is that exactly? Imani asked. Because this doesn't feel like standard security screening. The third officer stepped closer. We have reason to believe you may be carrying unauthorized data storage devices. Did anyone give you anything during the flight? The question confirmed Imani's suspicions. They were looking for Jeremiah's USB drive. Somehow, Brett or Vanessa had learned about it. Fortunately, Imani had anticipated something like this and had hidden the drive in her hair, secured within her thick curls by a decorative pin that appeared to be merely a fashion accessory. No, she answered truthfully. No one had given her anything during the flight. The exchange had technically occurred while the plane was still at the gate. The officers exchanged glances, clearly dissatisfied with her answer. The female officer began a more thorough search of Imani's belongings, damaging the lining of her expensive handbag and cracking the frame of her sunglasses. You'll be compensated for any damage, Officer Davis said unconvincingly. After 30 minutes of increasingly invasive searching, they moved to questioning. The pattern became clear. They were fishing for information but trying to make it seem like routine security. Questions about her job, her father's company, her interest in airline operations, and repeatedly, whether anyone had given her any electronic devices. After 2 hours of detention, Imani finally asserted herself. Officers, I've cooperated fully with this random screening, but I've now missed my connecting flight. Unless you're formally detaining me, I need to leave and, rebook my travel. Why are you in such a rush? The female officer asked suspiciously. Because I have business appointments that I'm now missing, Imani replied. Am I being detained? If so, I'd like to contact my attorney. The mention of an attorney changed the atmosphere immediately. The officers conferred quietly before Officer Davis returned. You're free to go, Ms. Johnson, but we'd advise cooperating more fully with security protocols in the future. I'll certainly keep that in mind, Imani replied, repacking her disarrayed belongings. As she exited, Officer Davis added one final comment. By the way, your profile has been flagged in the travel security system. You may experience additional screenings on future travels. The threat was unmistakable. When Imani finally reached the main terminal, she discovered her checked luggage was nowhere to be found. At the airline's baggage service counter, an agent in a skylight uniform regarded her with barely concealed hostility. "I'm sorry, but there's no record of your bag being loaded onto the flight," he claimed, despite Imani having received a baggage check tag at departure. "That's impossible," Imani stated. "I watched the agent tag and take my bag." "Sometimes tags become detached," the agent suggested with artificial sympathy. "We'll create a missing baggage report, but without a tag in our system, recovery is unlikely." As Imani completed the paperwork, she glanced across the terminal and froze. Vanessa, still in her flight attendant uniform, was speaking with a man in an airport security blazer, the head of security based on his insignia. They were looking in her direction, and there was nothing random about their interest. Imani quickly finished the form and walked away, pulling out her phone to text her assistant Taylor. "Need you to secure all my cloud accounts immediately. Changing all passwords. Something bigger than we thought happening here. We'll explain more, but sending you an audio file now before anything happens to my phone." She attached the partial recording she'd captured of Brett and Vanessa discussing Elite Sky and the profiling system, then sent it just as her phone battery warning flashed. Whether from genuine depletion or something more nefarious, she couldn't be sure. As the message sent successfully, Imani felt a moment of relief. Then her phone died completely, cutting her off from her most important lifeline just as she realized how deep this conspiracy truly went. With a dead phone and no luggage, Imani made her way to the Skylight customer service desk. The line stretched nearly 30 people deep, filled with frustrated travelers facing delays and cancellations. Imani took her place at the end, watching, as a single customer service representative named Alexandra handled the queue with deliberate slowness. When a white businessman complained about the wait, Alexandra immediately opened a second position and called him forward. When an elderly white couple mentioned missing their connection, they were promptly rebooked on the next flight. Yet when a Middle Eastern family with young children requested the same accommodation, Alexandra informed them all flights were full and they would need to wait until morning. The pattern was unmistakable to Imani's trained eye, another manifestation of the Elite Sky philosophy. After 2 hours of standing in line, she finally reached the counter. "How can I help you?" Alexandra asked without making eye contact, her tone suggesting she had no interest in actually helping. "I'd like to file a formal complaint about discriminatory treatment I experienced on my flight today," Imani stated clearly. Alexandra's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Complaint department is closed. You'll need to call the customer service number." "I understand you can take initial reports at this desk," Imani countered. "I reviewed your company policies while waiting." Alexandra's eyes narrowed slightly. "Fine. Nature of complaint: discrimination based on race and body size by flight attendants Vanessa Whitmore and Brett Coleman, followed by an inappropriate security detention orchestrated by airline staff." "That's a serious accusation," Alexandra replied, typing at an intentionally slow pace. "Can you provide specific details?" For 20 minutes, Imani recounted the events in precise detail. Throughout her account, she noticed Alexandra altering her words in the system. Discrimination became misunderstanding, forcibly removed became voluntarily relocated, and targeted harassment became standard security procedure. "That's not what I said," Imani pointed out, gesturing to the screen. "You're changing my statement." "I'm summarizing for clarity," Alexandra responded dismissively. "Now, about the flight attendants, are you certain of their names? We have no Brett Coleman in our system." "He was wearing a name tag that said Brett," Imani insisted. "Tall, early 30s, brown hair, scar on his right hand." Alexandra shrugged. "Without a correct name, we can't process that part of the complaint." "What about Vanessa Whitmore?" "I see a Vanessa W., but without confirmation of the full name. We can't formally include her either." Imani took a deep breath. "I'd like to speak with a manager, please." "Managers are only available by appointment." Then I'd like to make an appointment. The appointment system is currently down for maintenance, Alexandra replied with thinly veiled satisfaction. But I can certainly log your concern about our misunderstanding. Though I have to say, it sounds like you might have been a bit sensitive about routine airline procedures. First class does have certain comfort standards. The familiar phrase sent a chill through Imani. Alexandra wasn't just a difficult employee. She was part of the system. I have a recording, Imani stated, deciding to test the waters. Alexandra's expression changed instantly. A recording? Of what exactly? Staff discussing their discriminatory practices in something called Elite Sky. The color drained from Alexandra's face. She quickly pressed something under her desk. I'm afraid I need to step away for a system reset. The computers are acting up today. As Alexandra hurried away, Imani noticed her whispering urgently to a security guard and pointing in her direction. Moments later, the entire computer system at the customer service desk went down, screens flashing blue before going black. Ladies and gentlemen, another agent announced, due to a technical issue, we are temporarily unable to process complaints or rebookings. Please return tomorrow or use our website. Frustrated groans erupted from the waiting passengers. Imani, recognizing another strategic obstruction, gathered her belongings and headed for the airport lounge. She needed to charge her phone and regroup. At the lounge entrance, the receptionist eyed her skeptically. Membership card? My phone is dead, but I have a first-class ticket, Imani explained, presenting her boarding pass. The receptionist examined it with exaggerated scrutiny. This shows you flew economy. I was originally booked in first class but was moved due to a misunderstanding, Imani explained, emphasizing the euphemism Skylight used for discrimination. Without proper documentation of first-class status, I can't grant access, the receptionist stated firmly. Imani was preparing to argue when a voice behind her intervened. She's with me, said a white businessman in an expensive suit. He flashed his executive membership card. My guest. The receptionist immediately brightened. Of course, Mr. Reynolds, right this way. As they entered the lounge, the man turned to Imani. I saw what happened on the flight. Disgraceful. Name's Peter Reynolds. Imani Johnson. Thank you for the assist. Least I could do. I should have spoken up on the plane, but... He trailed off, the unspoken admission of cowardice hanging between them. Do you fly Skylight often? Imani asked. Twice weekly for the past 5 years. Diamond status. He hesitated. What you experienced today wasn't isolated. I've seen it happen to others. And said nothing? Imani couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Peter had the decency to look ashamed. Business relationships, career considerations, excuses, I know. But after watching what they did to you... He handed her a phone charger. Maybe I can start making amends by helping you power up your phone. While her phone slowly came back to life, Imani noticed Peter glancing nervously toward the entrance. Everything okay? She asked. Probably nothing, he replied unconvincingly. But the lounge manager keeps looking at us and making calls. Imani wasn't surprised. The tentacles of Elite Sky seemed to reach throughout the entire operation. When her phone finally had enough charge to function, it immediately buzzed with messages from her assistant Taylor. Audio file corrupted, only fragments recoverable. Trying to clean up what we have. Call me ASAP, concerning news about your father. Before Imani could call, she spotted a familiar face entering the lounge. Richard Whitmore himself, Vanessa's uncle and former COO of Skylight. Though he'd never met Imani in person, she recognized him from company photos. He was accompanied by 2 airport executives, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Imani angled herself away, straining to hear their discussion. Situation has been handled, one executive was saying. Security protocols were implemented as requested. Good, Richard replied. We can't have these new owners thinking they can change established standards overnight. The Johnson acquisition is a temporary setback. Once they understand the operational realities of maintaining our premium image, The daughter could be problematic, the other executive commented. If she reports what happened. Richard's laugh was dismissive. Reports to whom? Her father? The board? The media? We have contingencies for all scenarios. 20 years of industry relationships don't disappear with a change in ownership papers. What about the recording she mentioned to customer service? The first executive asked nervously. Already corrupted, Richard replied confidently. Our IT team is quite efficient. And if any fragments remain, they'll be dismissed as selective editing by an angry passenger trying to leverage her family connection for special treatment. Imani felt a surge of anger, but forced herself to remain still. The conspiracy was broader than she'd imagined, reaching into airport operations, security, and IT systems. The men moved toward a private meeting room, their voices fading. Peter Reynolds looked pale. You heard? Imani asked. He nodded. I knew things weren't right, but this level of organization. Who is this Richard they mentioned? Former COO, Imani explained. Apparently still pulling strings. And you're just someone concerned about airline practices, Imani replied carefully, not yet ready to trust a stranger completely. Her phone buzzed again with an incoming call from Taylor. Excusing herself, Imani moved to a quiet corner to answer. Taylor, what's happening with my father? He's in the hospital, Taylor replied, voice tense. Sudden chest pains during recovery from his procedure. Doctors can't explain it. He was fine this morning. Imani's blood ran cold. The timing couldn't be coincidence. I'm booking the next flight home, she said. There's more, Taylor continued. The audio file you sent, most was corrupted, but we salvaged a few seconds mentioning something called Elite Sky and profiling algorithms. Our cybersecurity team says the corruption wasn't random degradation. It was a targeted attack on the file after you sent it. The implications were staggering. Skylight's discriminatory network had reached beyond the airline, into telecommunications, possibly healthcare, and who knew what else. I'll be on the next available flight, Imani stated. Any airline but Skylight. As she ended the call, Imani noticed Richard Whitmore watching her from across the lounge, a calculating smile on his face. The message was clear. He knew exactly who she was, and the battle lines were drawn. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but stayed silent out of fear or convenience? Comment 1 if you've spoken up in such situations, or 2 if you've remained quiet but later regretted it. We all face these moral crossroads, but remember, silence often empowers the oppressors. If this story is opening your eyes to how discrimination can be systemic and disguised as company policy, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-world stories that expose injustice. The question now is, how far would Richard Whitmore go to protect his discriminatory empire? Would Imani's evidence be enough, or was she fighting a system larger than one airline? What would happen to Jeremiah and others who dared to speak up? As Imani prepared to leave the lounge, her phone rang with an unknown number. She answered cautiously. They suspended me. Jeremiah's voice came through, breathless and urgent. 20 minutes after landing, pending investigation for protocol, violations and unauthorized communication with passengers. I'm so sorry, Imani replied, finding a quiet corner to continue the conversation. Did they mention me specifically? They didn't have to. Brett saw us talking and suddenly I'm escorted off premises by security. Jeremiah's voice dropped lower. But that's not why I'm calling. There's something you need to know about Elite Sky, the passenger profiling system. It's more than that, Jeremiah explained. Elite Sky is an unofficial policy directed specifically at Black, Latino, Middle Eastern, and plus-sized passengers. They track who gets upgraded, who complains, who gets discouraged from premium cabins. They have success metrics for maintaining what they call cabin demographic targets. That's explicitly illegal, Imani noted, her mind already cataloging relevant anti-discrimination statutes. And completely deniable, Jeremiah countered. Everything's coded in corporate language, premium image maintenance, passenger comfort standards, ambiance guidelines. Nothing in writing explicitly mentions race or size. The USB drive you gave me, Has the algorithm parameters. It shows the scoring system that ranks passengers, but I need to give you more documentation in person. Can you meet me at the airport coffee shop near Terminal C in 30 minutes? Imani hesitated, sensing potential danger but also recognizing the importance of gathering evidence. I'll be there. Outside the lounge, Imani noticed increased security presence, officers glancing at her with too much interest as she passed. Someone had clearly circulated her description. She took a circuitous route to Terminal C, using service corridors where possible, and keeping her head down. From a distance, she spotted Jeremiah at the coffee shop, nervously checking his phone. Before she could approach, Brett appeared with 2 airport security officers, moving purposefully toward him. Imani watched in horror as Brett pointed accusingly at Jeremiah, who stood his ground initially but soon found himself flanked by the officers. One grabbed his arm when he tried to step away. Within moments, they were forcibly escorting him toward a service door, Jeremiah's protests drawing stares from nearby passengers. Without thinking, Imani hurried toward them. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" Brett turned, his expression darkening when he recognized her. "This doesn't concern you, Ms. Johnson." "It does when I witness someone being manhandled in public," Imani countered, pulling out her phone to record. "Does Skylight typically have its employees detained for speaking to passengers?" "Put that phone away," one security officer demanded. "Airport security areas are restricted recording zones. We're in a public terminal," Imani pointed out, "not a security area." The second officer stepped toward her menacingly. "Ma'am, interfere with security operations and you'll be arrested for obstruction." "On what grounds?" a new voice interjected. Imani turned to see a white woman in her 40s, dressed in a tailored suit, observing the scene with professional interest. "This is a private security matter," Brett stated firmly. "Please move along." The woman smiled coolly. "I don't think I will." She produced a business card. "Catherine Parker, civil rights attorney, and I'm very interested in why airline employees are using airport security to detain staff members in public spaces without clear cause." Brett's confidence faltered. He violated company confidentiality policies. "Which specific policies?" Catherine pressed. "And does Skylight typically involve airport security rather than human resources and employment matters?" The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Catherine continued recording with her phone, narrating the scene. Airport security officers detaining airline employee after conversation with passenger who experienced discrimination. Airline representative unable to cite specific policy violations. "Enough," Brett snapped. "You have no jurisdiction here." "The courts have jurisdiction," Catherine replied calmly. "And they tend to take a dim view of coordinated intimidation. Now, unless you're formally arresting this gentleman, in which case I'm offering my services as his attorney, I suggest you release him immediately." After a tense standoff, the security officers reluctantly let go of Jeremiah, who quickly stepped away from them. "This isn't over," Brett warned, pointing at both Jeremiah and Imani before stalking away, security officers following. Catherine turned to them. "Let's talk somewhere less exposed. My car is in short-term parking." Once safely in her vehicle, Catherine explained, "I've been investigating Skylight for 8 months. I represent 12 clients who've experienced discriminatory treatment, mostly in premium cabins or lounges." "Just 12?" Imani asked. "Those brave enough to come forward," Catherine clarified. "Most people just swallow the humiliation and avoid the airline afterward, which is exactly what Skylight wants. They're systematically discouraging certain passengers while maintaining plausible deniability." "It's called Elite Sky," Jeremiah confirmed. "An unofficial program that's been operating for years." Catherine nodded. "I've heard rumors but couldn't prove its existence. My clients have been threatened, had their complaints lost, been subjected to additional security screenings when they persist. One nearly lost a job after Skylight somehow flagged her in a background check system as a security risk after she filed discrimination complaints. This goes beyond the airline," Imani realized. "They have connections to airport security, possibly other systems." "Richard Whitmore's network," Catherine agreed. former COO with 20 years of industry, relationships, the perfect setup for systemic discrimination, influence without direct accountability. Jeremiah pulled out his phone. I have more documentation, staff communications, training materials with coded language, statistics showing cabin demographics, shifting after Elite Sky implementation. As they reviewed the evidence, Imani felt increasingly certain this was why her father had acquired Skylight. Not just as a business opportunity, but as a chance to transform a company with deeply entrenched discriminatory practices. I should tell you both who I really am, Imani said finally. My name is Dr. Imani Johnson. My father, Marcus Johnson, acquired Skylight yesterday. I was conducting an incognito service evaluation when I experienced discrimination firsthand. Catherine's eyes widened. That changes everything. With ownership authority behind us. It might not be that simple, Imani cautioned, explaining Richard Whitmore's apparent confidence despite the change in ownership. And now my father's mysteriously back in the hospital with unexplained complications. They're fighting to maintain control, Catherine concluded. A discriminatory system that's profitable for those at the top won't surrender easily. As they developed a plan to gather more evidence and protect Jeremiah from further retaliation, none of them noticed the dark sedan parked 2 rows away, its occupant photographing their meeting through a telephoto lens. That evening, Catherine returned to her hotel room to find the door slightly ajar. Inside, the room had been methodically searched, dresser drawers partially open, mattress askew, laptop visibly tampered with. Most troubling, her case files were missing, including all client documentation related to Skylight. She immediately called Imani. They've been in my room, all the files are gone, we need to move quickly, they're eliminating evidence. The following morning, Imani met Catherine at a small cafe far from the airport, both women having changed hotels overnight as a precaution. Jeremiah joined them an hour later, constantly glancing over his shoulder. I think I was followed, he admitted, sliding into the booth. Black SUV, 2 men, airport security badges, but not in uniform. Catherine nodded grimly. They're mobilizing resources. We need to do the same. Imani took a deep breath. I think it's time I fully reveal who I am and why my father acquired Skylight. She explained how Marcus Johnson had built MJ Enterprises specifically to transform companies with problematic practices. Their business model wasn't just about profits, it was about systematic culture change while maintaining business success. My father received multiple whistleblower reports about Skylight's discriminatory practices 6 months ago, Imani revealed. Former employees, passengers who'd been humiliated, even a board member concerned about legal liability. He spent months verifying the claims before making the acquisition offer. That explains the urgency in Elite Sky's response, Catherine noted. They knew exactly why he bought the airline. And now they're trying to force him out before he can implement changes, Jeremiah added. Imani nodded. The acquisition was completed faster than planned because my father received information that Richard Whitmore was destroying evidence. My inspection flight wasn't random. It was to gather first-hand experience of the passenger treatment system. Well, you certainly got that, Catherine said dryly. But I never expected the level of organization behind it, Imani admitted. This goes beyond a few biased employees. It's an entire shadow operation with technological support, external connections, and enforcement mechanisms. Their strategy session was interrupted by Imani's phone. It was Taylor. You need to see this, her assistant said without preamble. I'm sending a link to your secure email. The link opened to a financial news site with the headline, Skylight Airlines faces uncertain future under new ownership. The article subtly questioned Marcus Johnson's health and ability to manage the airline, citing industry sources concerned about hasty changes to established operational practices. They're already controlling the narrative, Catherine observed. Before they could discuss further, Imani received another call, this time from the hospital where her father was being treated. Ms. Johnson, the doctor began, his voice carefully neutral, we've noticed some concerning developments in your father's condition. His medication doesn't seem to be having the expected effect. What are you saying? Imani asked, alarm rising. There are inconsistencies in his response pattern. We're running tests to determine if there might have been some interaction with other substances. Are you suggesting someone tampered with his medication? Imani asked bluntly. The doctor's pause spoke volumes. I'm not suggesting anything specific, but as a precaution, we've moved him to a more secure room and implemented additional verification protocols for all staff entering his room. After ending the call, Imani's hands trembled slightly. They went after my father. Catherine's expression hardened. We need to move your father to a different facility immediately, one with no connection to Richard Whitmore or his associates. Already on it, Imani replied, texting Taylor to arrange a secure medical transport. Minutes later, Taylor called back, her voice strained. There's a problem with the hospital footage. The security recordings from your father's floor during the time in question are missing. They're blaming a system upgrade, but the IT manager I spoke with doesn't seem convinced. The implications chilled Imani to the core. Whitmore's network apparently extended into healthcare security systems as well. While Catherine made calls to expedite her father's transfer, Imani returned to her hotel room to gather documents, only to find it completely ransacked. Her laptop was gone, papers scattered, and most alarmingly, the USB drive Jeremiah had given her was missing from its hiding place. On her freshly made bed lay a manila envelope. Inside were photos. Her parents' home with red crosshairs superimposed over the windows, her younger brother entering his college dormitory, her sister picking up her children from school. A typed note read simply, "Sell the airline back to Waoi, the right people, or next time it won't be just a warning." Imani's phone buzzed with a news alert. Investor Richard Whitmore announces bid to save Skylight from inexperienced management, cites concerns over new owner's health and daughter's disruptive allegations. The article quoted anonymous board members expressing concern about Marcus Johnson's medical condition and reckless accusations by his daughter that could damage the airline's premium reputation. When Imani called Jeremiah to warn him, his roommate answered instead. He's gone, the roommate explained. Two men came to the apartment claiming to be from airline HR, said they needed to discuss his options. He left with them 3 hours ago and hasn't come back. His phone goes straight to voicemail. By evening, the coordinated attack had expanded further. Business publications were running stories questioning Marcus Johnson's acquisition strategy. Financial blogs speculated about MJ Enterprises' stability, and social media buzzed with suspiciously similar comments about maintaining premium airline standards. They're activating every connection they have, Catherine observed when they reconvened at a new location. Media contacts, business allies, online influence networks, all to pressure your father to sell back the airline before he can expose their system. Imani's determination only strengthened. Then we need to expose it first. Together with Catherine, she compiled what evidence remained: Jeremiah's partial testimony, her personal experience, Catherine's client statements, the fragments of recovered audio, and patterns of documented incidents. They contacted several major news outlets, careful to use secure channels that couldn't be easily compromised. The initial response was encouraging. 3 journalists expressed immediate interest, particularly given the Johnson family's business reputation. One cable news network scheduled an interview, and a prominent business magazine began fact-checking for a potential exposé. For a brief moment, it seemed the tide might turn. Skylight's stock price dipped as rumors of discrimination investigations spread. The board called an emergency meeting, and Vanessa Whitmore was publicly suspended pending an internal investigation, a clear attempt at damage control. Richard Whitmore himself appeared on a financial news program, looking appropriately concerned as he acknowledged isolated customer service incidents, while positioning himself as the solution rather than the problem. As someone who dedicated 20 years to building Skylight's reputation for excellence, he stated smoothly, I'm deeply troubled by these allegations. If true, they represent a significant departure from the values I instilled during my tenure. I'm offering my expertise to help the current ownership address these concerns and restore our commitment to all passengers. The performance was masterful. Expressing concern while implying the problems began after his departure, positioning himself as the savior rather than the architect of discrimination. Then, almost overnight, the narrative shifted. Stories began appearing about Imani's troubled history. Fabricated accounts of previous discrimination claims against other companies, false allegations of financial improprieties, and suggestions she was using race as leverage in business disputes. Doctored photos showed her appearing aggressive in contrived situations. Anonymous former associates questioned her credibility. The cable news network canceled the scheduled interview, citing scheduling conflicts, while the magazine's editor suddenly decided the story lacked sufficient verification. Catherine wasn't spared either. Bar complaints mysteriously appeared in her home state, alleging witness coaching and evidence manipulation in previous cases. Her most prominent clients began receiving calls questioning her representation. Jeremiah finally reappeared. He was a shadow of himself. "They threatened my family," he explained, voice hollow. "Showed me photos of my parents' house, my sister's workplace, said they'd ensure none of us would ever work again in any industry where their friends had influence." Which is apparently everywhere, Catherine noted bitterly. "They're using every corporate connection, every favor owed, every pressure point to silence us." Imani's phone rang. It was Taylor again, this time with news that sent ice through her veins. "The board has called an emergency meeting tomorrow," her assistant reported. "They've excluded your father due to health concerns and are voting on a temporary leadership committee to guide the airline through this transitional period." "They can't do that without shareholder approval," Imani protested. "They're citing an obscure bylaw about leadership incapacitation," Taylor explained. "Your father's lawyers are fighting it, but Richard Whitmore has been invited to serve as interim advisor to the committee." The coordinated attack was reaching its climax, a corporate coup designed to wrest control from Marcus Johnson before he could dismantle the discriminatory system at Skylight's core. As darkness fell, Imani found herself running out of options. Her evidence was compromised, her allies threatened, her reputation under attack, and her father's condition still mysteriously unstable. The vast network she was fighting had demonstrated power beyond what she'd imagined possible, reaching into healthcare, media, legal systems, and corporate boardrooms with frightening ease. And somewhere in that network, the truth about Elite Sky remained hidden. The systematic discrimination that had humiliated countless passengers and created a toxic corporate culture built on exclusion and bias. Tomorrow's board meeting loomed as a potential point of no return. If Richard Whitmore and his allies succeeded in their corporate takeover, the evidence of discrimination might disappear forever behind a wall of denials, destroyed records, and intimidated witnesses. The morning of the board meeting dawned with a glimmer of hope. Overnight, Imani and Catherine had worked relentlessly, salvaging what evidence remained and preparing their case. 3 board members had expressed concerns about the emergency leadership committee, potentially giving them a fighting chance to block Richard Whitmore's power grab. "We don't need to win the entire battle today," Catherine advised as they prepared. "We just need to prevent them from seizing control while we gather more evidence." Their strategy focused on raising enough legal and regulatory questions to make board members hesitate. Catherine had prepared a detailed brief outlining potential liability under civil rights statutes if discriminatory practices were proven, while Imani compiled performance data showing how diversity initiatives at other Johnson-acquired companies had actually increased profitability. As they reviewed their materials one final time, Imani's phone buzzed with an incoming news alert. Her heart leaped when she saw the headline, "Skylight Flight Attendant Suspended After Racial Discrimination Allegations." The article featured a company statement announcing Vanessa Whitmore's suspension, pending a thorough investigation into passenger treatment standards. A spokesperson was quoted expressing deep concern about any behavior inconsistent with our commitment to respectful service for all passengers. "They're trying to contain the damage," Catherine observed cautiously, "sacrificing Vanessa to protect the system." "Still, it's the first public acknowledgement," Imani noted. "Maybe the pressure is working." Shortly afterward, Skylight's stock recovered slightly as financial analysts praised the company's swift response to allegations. Several business publications ran stories about the airline's commitment to addressing concerns, creating an impression of accountability. Richard Whitmore himself made another public appearance, this time on a morning news program. With practiced sincerity, he expressed shock and disappointment about the incidents. If these allegations prove true, he stated solemnly, they represent a grave departure from the culture of excellence I worked to build at Skylight. During my tenure, we implemented comprehensive training programs to ensure all passengers received equal treatment regardless of background. The performance was masterful, presenting himself as the solution while subtly suggesting the problems began after his departure. When the interviewer asked about Elite Sky, Richard appeared genuinely confused. "I'm not familiar with any such program," he responded smoothly. "Skylight has always operated with complete transparency about our service standards. If someone has created an unauthorized system, that's deeply troubling and should be investigated fully." Watching the interview, Catherine shook her head in disgust. Complete inversion of reality. He's positioning himself as the potential savior from a problem he created. By mid-morning, the narrative seemed to be shifting in their favor. Corporate watchdog groups were issuing statements calling for thorough investigation. Passengers were sharing their own experiences on social media, and parent Skylight discrimination was trending nationally. "Maybe we've reached critical mass," Imani suggested hopefully. "Enough publicity that they can't just bury it anymore." Her optimism was short-lived. Just before noon, as they prepared to leave for the board meeting, Catherine received an urgent call from her law firm. "Someone's circulating doctored evidence," she reported, her face pale. "Emails purportedly from me coaching witnesses to make false discrimination claims against Skylight for settlement money." "That's absurd," Imani protested. "They can't possibly expect people to believe that. They don't need everyone to believe." It's just enough to create doubt," Catherine explained. "And it gets worse. They filed an ethics complaint against me with the Bar Association. My managing partner is concerned about the firm's reputation and wants me to step back from the case." Almost simultaneously, Imani's phone began buzzing with media requests. Not about Skylight's discrimination, but about newly surfaced allegations against her. A gossip blog had published a piece titled, "The Johnson Family's Race Card: How Imani Johnson Built a Career Crying Wolf," featuring supposed accounts from former classmates and business associates, describing a pattern of fabricated discrimination. Claims the article included doctored photos showing Imani appearing angry and aggressive in various contexts, with captions suggesting she regularly played the victim when faced with legitimate criticism. Most disturbing was a completely fabricated incident, alleging she had tried to extort a settlement from a previous employer by threatening racial discrimination claims. "This is insane," Imani said, scrolling through the increasingly outlandish allegations. "None of this ever happened." "It doesn't need to be true," Catherine explained grimly. "It just needs to be loud enough to drown out the actual discrimination evidence." Their phones continued buzzing as the smear campaign gained momentum. Business publications that had previously expressed interest in the discrimination story now contacted them for comment on the troubling allegations about Imani's past. Social media algorithms amplified the false narratives, with Imani lied suddenly trending alongside orchestrated expressions of disappointment from apparent Skylight defenders. When they finally reached out to Jeremiah for his perspective, they discovered his employment record had been mysteriously altered to include several discipline incidents that had never occurred. Skylight's HR department had discovered reports of passenger complaints, insubordination, and protocol violations, all conveniently dated before the current controversy. "They're poisoning every well," Catherine observed, "discrediting every witness, compromising every piece of evidence. By the time they arrived at Skylight headquarters for the board meeting, the narrative had completely transformed. Security guards at the entrance checked their identification with exaggerated scrutiny, while employees in the lobby whispered behind raised hands as they passed. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was frigid. Board members who had previously expressed concern now avoided eye contact. Richard Whitmore sat in a position of prominence, a portfolio of documents spread before him, radiating confidence. "Dr. Johnson, Ms. Parker," the board chair acknowledged stiffly. "In light of recent developments, We've decided to address the leadership question first, before entertaining any presentations about alleged operational concerns. These aren't allegations, Imani stated firmly. We have documented evidence of systematic discrimination. A board member slid a tablet toward her, displaying the gossip blog article. We also have documented evidence about you, Dr. Johnson. The board must consider the source of accusations when evaluating their credibility. Those stories are fabricated, Imani insisted. They appeared literally hours ago, with no prior history or corroboration. Richard Whitmore cleared his throat softly. If I may, the board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the company from reputational damage based on unsubstantiated claims, particularly when they appear potentially motivated by personal factors. What personal factors? Imani demanded. Another board member, previously supportive, looked uncomfortable but proceeded. Your father's acquisition of Skylight occurred under unusual circumstances. Rapid timeline, limited due diligence, immediately followed by serious health issues preventing his participation in leadership transition. And now, Richard added smoothly, allegations from his daughter that conveniently position her to assume greater control based on claims from compromised sources. He gestured toward a document. Mr. Lewis's employment record shows multiple disciplinary issues long before these supposed discoveries. The setup was complete. Every avenue of evidence had been poisoned, every witness discredited, every supporter compromised. The board had been skillfully manipulated to view Imani not as a whistleblower, but as an opportunist using discrimination claims to seize control during her father's illness. After brief discussion, the vote proceeded as anticipated. 8-3, the board approved a temporary leadership committee to guide the airline during this period of transition and controversy. Richard Whitmore was appointed interim advisor to the committee, effectively granting him operational control without official title. As they left the boardroom, Imani received a video message from an unknown number, footage of herself in the airport bathroom from yesterday, followed by clips of her in hotel corridors at the cafe meeting with Catherine and Jeremiah, even entering her father's hospital room. The accompanying text was simple. We have more. How would these look with the right editing? Cooperate, and they stay private. The message was clear. Richard Whitmore and his network were not only attacking her professionally, but threatening to release manipulated personal footage to further destroy her credibility. The surveillance had been constant and comprehensive. Catherine's experience was no better. Her law license was now under formal review based on the fabricated ethics complaints. 2 of her highest-profile clients had already called to terminate her services, citing concerns about recent developments. Jeremiah's situation proved even more dire. His sister called in tears. She'd been terminated from her teaching position for budget reasons, despite having tenure. His parents had received notices that their health insurance coverage was under review due to application discrepancies discovered during a routine audit. They're going after everyone connected to us, Catherine observed as they regrouped in a secure location that evening. This is beyond corporate infighting. It's systematic intimidation. Imani's concerns centered on her father. The hospital is recommending transfer to a specialized care facility for his continuing treatment, she reported. I looked into it. The facility's board includes Richard Whitmore's brother. The message couldn't be clearer. Richard Whitmore was demonstrating the reach of his network, showing how easily he could disrupt their lives through seemingly legitimate corporate and institutional channels. From healthcare to employment, from media to legal systems, his connections allowed him to apply pressure with frightening precision. As night fell, their options seemed increasingly limited. Imani's social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages based on the false allegations. Imani lied continued trending, amplified by what appeared to be coordinated bot networks. Mainstream news outlets had picked up the hashtag, reporting on the controversy while carefully avoiding endorsement, but effectively spreading the smear campaign. Catherine's law firm had placed her on administrative leave pending resolution of ethics complaints. Jeremiah had been formally terminated for previously documented performance issues, with a notice that he was now blacklisted from employment with any airline in the major alliance group. effectively ending his aviation career. Financial pressures mounted as legal bills for fighting the various allegations accumulated. Imani discovered her credit score had mysteriously dropped 200 points overnight, flagged for suspicious activity. Catherine's firm froze her partnership distributions due to the pending complaints. "They're trying to exhaust our resources," Catherine recognized. "Financial, legal, emotional. They want us to give up." Imani stared out the hotel window at the city lights, feeling the weight of the seemingly impossible battle. Richard Whitmore's discriminatory system was protected by layers of plausible deniability, corporate language, and a network of powerful allies willing to help maintain the status quo. "There has to be a way," she insisted, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "People have been fighting systemic discrimination for generations. We can't give up because it's hard." "I'm not suggesting giving up," Catherine clarified. "But we need to recognize what we're facing. This isn't just about one airline's discriminatory practices anymore. It's about a network of corporate power, brokers willing to destroy lives to protect their ability to discriminate." Imani's phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. "Hospital security just removed me from your father's room. Said visitors now restricted to immediate family with advance approval. Something's happening." This was the darkest moment yet. Cut off from her father, her reputation in tatters, her allies under attack, and Richard Whitmore on the verge of reclaiming control of the airline to continue his discriminatory practices. The system of oppression had mobilized every resource at its disposal to protect itself. But in that moment of near defeat, Imani's phone buzzed again. An encrypted message from an unknown number. "Not everyone supports Elite Sky. Some of us have been waiting for a chance to fight back. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park, North Entrance. Come alone. Look for the person reading Corporate Ethics in Practice, your book." Have you ever felt overwhelmed fighting against a system much bigger than yourself? Comment 1 if you've experienced the David versus Goliath feeling of standing up to powerful interests, or 2 if you're inspired by those who do. This story shows how discrimination can be hidden behind corporate policies and protected by powerful networks. If you believe in exposing these systems, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that shine light on hidden injustices. The question remains, who sent this mysterious message? Is it a genuine ally or another trap set by Richard Whitmore? And even if it's real help, could anyone truly stand against a network with such far-reaching power? The next morning, Imani arrived at Riverside Park 30 minutes early, positioning herself strategically to observe all approaches to the north entrance. After everything she'd experienced, caution was paramount. This mysterious contact could be genuine help or another elaborate trap. At precisely 10 a.m., a woman in her 60s with silver hair and impeccable posture entered the park. She sat on a bench, pulled out a copy of Corporate Ethics in Practice, Imani's book on transforming discriminatory business cultures, and began reading. Nothing about her screamed threat, but appearances had proven deceptive throughout this ordeal. After watching for several minutes, Imani approached cautiously. "Interesting reading choice." The woman looked up, studying Imani's face intently before responding. "Dr. Johnson, I've been hoping to meet you under better circumstances." She extended her hand. "Diane Miller, former Executive Vice President of Customer Experience at Skylight Airlines." Imani shook her hand while maintaining a careful distance. "Former? Pushed out 3 years ago after questioning certain passenger management protocols," Diane explained with a bitter smile. "Official reason was strategic restructuring, but it happened 1 week after I raised concerns about demographics. Targeting in premium cabins. Elite Sky," Imani stated flatly. Diane's eyes widened slightly. "You know the name. That's further than most get before they're silenced." "I'm not most people." "Clearly not," Diane agreed, glancing around the park. "We shouldn't talk here. Too exposed. My car is nearby, but I understand if you're hesitant to trust me." Imani considered her options. "Give me one piece of information I can verify immediately." "Fair enough," Diane nodded. Richard Whitmore's discrimination system didn't start at Skylight. He implemented similar programs at Continental Express in the 90s and ValueJet before that. The algorithm has evolved, but the concept hasn't. changed, using coded language and plausible deniability to maintain preferred passenger demographics in premium cabins. Imani quickly searched these details on her phone. While nothing explicitly confirmed Diane's claim, both airlines had faced discrimination lawsuits during Whitmore's tenure, settled confidentially with no admission of wrongdoing. "Let's talk in your car," Imani decided. "But I'm texting a friend. My location and your description first." Diane smiled approvingly. Smart precaution. In the privacy of Diane's modest sedan, the former executive revealed why she'd reached out. "You're not alone in fighting this. There's an entire network of former employees who left or were pushed out after questioning Elite Sky. We call ourselves the Altitude Alliance." "Why haven't you come forward before?" Imani asked. "We have, individually. Each of us faced what you're experiencing now: reputational attacks, career destruction, mysterious legal troubles. Richard's network is vast, built over 30 years in the industry. Going against him alone is professional suicide. But now there's you, someone with both the moral courage to fight and the corporate authority to implement change. Your father's acquisition created the first real opportunity to dismantle the system." Diane drove them to an unassuming office building in the suburbs. Inside, Imani discovered what looked like a small non-profit workspace, but was actually the headquarters of a coordinated resistance effort. A dozen people of various ages and ethnicities worked at computers or discussed strategy around whiteboards covered with diagrams of corporate structures. "Welcome to the Altitude Alliance," Diane announced. "Former pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, reservation agents, executives, all pushed out for questioning the discriminatory practices at Skylight and other airlines." A tall black man approached, extending his hand. "Captain Marcus Williams, former Skylight pilot, terminated after filing internal complaints about discriminatory crew assignments and passenger treatment protocols." An older South Asian woman joined them. Dr. Priya Sharma, former head of customer research, restructured after identifying statistical anomalies in passenger satisfaction scores broken down by demographic factors. One by one, Alliance members introduced themselves, each with a similar story of noticing discrimination, raising concerns, and facing retaliation, disguised as routine business decisions. "We've been documenting evidence for years," Diane explained, leading Imani to a secure room with multiple servers. Passenger profiling systems, coded training materials, internal communications about demographic balance targets, all carefully preserved. Imani examined the evidence with growing amazement. "This is comprehensive. Why not go public?" "Look what happened to you with just a few days of resistance," Dr. Sharma pointed out. "We've all experienced Richard's retribution individually. Career blacklisting, ruined reputations, financial attacks, even physical threats." Marcus Williams nodded solemnly. "My home was broken into 3 times after I filed my complaint. Nothing valuable taken, but family photos were disturbed. Bedroom, drawers searched. Clear intimidation. Many tried to fight through proper channels," Diane added. "HR, ethics hotlines, even anonymous tips to regulators. Each attempt was traced back and crushed. Richard's network extends throughout the industry and beyond. Corporate security, HR databases, media contacts, even law enforcement in key cities. We've stayed silent out of fear," admitted a younger woman who'd been introduced as a former marketing coordinator. "But we've continued gathering evidence, building the case, waiting for the right moment." Imani studied the faces around her. People who'd sacrificed careers and security to stand against injustice, even when victory seemed impossible. "And now you think that moment has arrived?" "With your father's acquisition, yes," Diane confirmed. "But there's a narrow window. Our source inside Richard's inner circle says they're pushing to force a complete sale by week's end. The temporary leadership committee is preparing to claim your father's health makes him unfit to maintain ownership." "They can't legally force a sale that quickly," Imani protested. "Legally, no. But they're creating conditions where selling becomes the only viable option to prevent complete devaluation. The stock manipulation, media campaign, and board coup are just the beginning." Captain Williams pulled up internal communications on a secure tablet. According to our source, they have 3 escalation phases planned if your father resists, claiming financial irregularities in MJ Enterprises, triggering regulatory investigations through industry contacts, and as a last resort, leaking falsified personal information about your family to tabloids. They've done this before, Dr. Sharma added quietly. Horizon Airlines in 2018. The owner fought Richard's network and lost everything. Not just the airline, but his entire business, empire, and personal reputation. The alliance's intelligence painted a grim picture. Within 72 hours, the board would vote to formalize Richard's control under the guise of emergency management. Once that happened, evidence would be systematically purged, whistleblowers silenced, through termination, and any remaining resistance crushed through legal and financial warfare. We have decades of combined experience fighting this system and repeatedly losing, Diane summarized. But we've never had someone with both corporate authority and moral courage positioned to make actual change. You're the first real hope we've had. Imani absorbed the weight of their expectations. These people had risked everything to stand against injustice, collecting evidence despite knowing the personal cost. They'd formed an underground resistance against corporate discrimination when easier paths were available. Tell me about your source inside Richard's operation. Imani, requested. How reliable is their information? Diane hesitated before responding. Very reliable. It's Richard's executive assistant, Marion. She's been feeding us information for years, ever since she discovered her own brother was demoted after being, flagged by the system for creating demographic imbalance in the crew scheduling algorithm. She's taking an enormous risk, Imani noted. We all are, Diane replied simply. Discrimination destroys lives, Dr. Johnson, not just through the humiliation of moments like what you experienced, but through the systematic denial of opportunities, the constant message that certain people don't belong in premium spaces. We're fighting for basic human dignity. As the Alliance members shared their stories and evidence, a clearer picture emerged of how Elite Sky operated, a sophisticated system of discrimination hidden behind corporate language, technological algorithms, and plausible deniability. Richard Whitmore hadn't just created a discriminatory airline. He'd built a template for acceptable corporate racism that maintained white comfort while excluding others under the guise of premium experiences. The depth of the conspiracy was staggering. The profiling algorithm extended beyond passengers to crew assignments, ensuring certain flights maintained specific demographic presentations based on route and cabin class. Employee evaluation metrics subtly penalized those who treated all passengers equally instead of enforcing the unwritten hierarchy. Promotion paths systematically favored those who embraced the discriminatory culture while sidelining objectors. Most disturbing was evidence that Richard had begun licensing aspects of the profiling technology to other premium service industries. Luxury hotels, high-end retailers, exclusive clubs, creating a broader ecosystem of acceptable discrimination, masked as customer experience management. He's commercializing discrimination, Imani realized, selling the technology and methodology to exclude people based on race and size while maintaining plausible deniability. Precisely, Diane confirmed. That's why he's fighting so hard. This goes beyond one airline. It's an entire business model built on systematic exclusion while avoiding legal consequences. As night fell, the Alliance and Imani developed a comprehensive plan to expose everything within the critical 72-hour window. They identified sympathetic board members who might help if given protection from retaliation. They coordinated with trusted media contacts for simultaneous coverage across multiple platforms. They prepared court filings to be submitted the moment they had sufficient evidence protection. The strategy was comprehensive, but high risk. Success required perfect coordination and timing, and absolute secrecy until execution. If Richard's network discovered their plan before implementation, the consequences would be devastating not just for Imani, but for every Alliance member who'd already sacrificed so much. As they finished their planning session, Diane pulled Imani aside. There's something else you should know. This isn't just about Skyalite anymore. Richard's documentation reveals something called Project Elevation, an expansion of the Elite Sky methodology into banking, insurance, healthcare, and education systems. He's building infrastructure for systematic discrimination across entire industries, Imani realized with growing horror, while maintaining complete deniability through technological abstraction and coded language, Diane confirmed. The perfect system of exclusion, invisible, pervasive, and nearly impossible to prove without insider access. The stakes had grown exponentially. This wasn't just about one airline's discriminatory practices, or even Imani's family business. It was about confronting an evolving, technology-enabled system of discrimination designed to persist indefinitely while evading legal consequences. As Imani left the Alliance headquarters that night, the weight of responsibility felt crushing. She was no longer fighting just for her own dignity or her father's company. She was standing against a sophisticated discrimination infrastructure that could shape society for generations if left unchallenged. And she had just 72 hours to stop it. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows as Imani reviewed the battle plan. The Altitude Alliance had worked through the night, coordinating resources and finalizing strategy. Their collective experience fighting Richard Whitmore's discrimination network provided invaluable insight into its vulnerabilities and pressure points. The primary weakness in Richard's system is its necessary secrecy, Diane explained, indicating a complex organizational chart. Elite Sky operates through plausible deniability, actions that seem individually defensible but collectively reveal systematic discrimination. If enough evidence emerges simultaneously across multiple channels, the pattern becomes undeniable. Captain Williams outlined their media strategy. We've identified journalists at 14 publications who've previously investigated corporate discrimination, reporters with both integrity and sufficient institutional protection to withstand pressure from Richard's network. Dr. Sharma demonstrated the technical evidence they'd assembled. The passenger profiling algorithm contains explicit demographic weighting factors disguised as premium experience optimization parameters. When decoded, they clearly show race, religious indicators, and body size as negative factors in cabin suitability scoring. A former IT specialist named Jason explained how they'd preserved the evidence. Everything is cryptographically verified and timestamped on independent servers. Richard's team can't claim the documentation was fabricated or altered. Throughout the morning, Alliance members arrived in staggered patterns to avoid detection. Former flight attendants who'd been terminated after questioning passenger treatment protocols. Mechanics who'd reported safety concerns when Elite Sky priorities overrode standard procedures. Reservation agents who'd refused to implement the special handling codes for certain passengers. Each brought pieces of the puzzle: documentation, testimony, recorded conversations, statistical analyses that collectively revealed the comprehensive nature of Richard's discrimination system. The genius of Elite Sky was making each individual action seem justified by non-discriminatory factors, explained Miguel, a former customer service trainer. A flight attendant could claim they were enforcing comfort standards rather than discriminating based on size. Gate agents could cite passenger flow optimization when separating travelers by race. The system was designed for plausible deniability. But the patterns become unmistakable when viewed comprehensively, Diane added. That's why Richard works so hard to prevent collective evidence from emerging. Each complaint is isolated, each whistleblower discredited individually, preventing anyone from seeing the complete picture. By mid-morning, they had assembled a devastating case, not just against Skylight's practices, but against Richard Whitmore's entire methodology of acceptable discrimination, masked as premium customer experience management. The evidence revealed how Elite Sky had evolved from crude demographic targeting to sophisticated algorithmic discrimination. Early versions had simply identified passengers by observable characteristics. Later iterations incorporated subtle proxies, zip codes as racial indicators, name analysis for ethnic background, even spending pattern analysis to identify passengers who didn't belong in premium cabins despite having purchased tickets. Most disturbing were the expansion plans for Project Elevation, Richard's initiative to license the discrimination methodology to other industries. Documentation showed pilot programs already underway with luxury hotel chains, financial services firms, and exclusive healthcare providers, all implementing variations of the same passenger profiling technology under innocuous names like experience calibration and premium journey optimization. He's created an entire consultancy around systematic discrimination without ever using terms that would trigger legal scrutiny, Diane explained. The algorithms make decisions that humans would be sued for, while executives maintain plausible deniability. At noon, their strategy session was interrupted by an urgent message from Marion, Richard's assistant and their inside source. Richard had accelerated his timeline. The board vote on permanent leadership changes had been moved up to the following morning. They now had less than 24 hours before he consolidated control. We need to move faster, Imani decided. Coordinate with Catherine to prepare emergency legal filings. Alert our media contacts to stand by for simultaneous releases. And we need to identify which board members might still be reached if given sufficient evidence and protection. As they accelerated preparations, Imani received troubling news from the hospital. Her father's condition had mysteriously deteriorated again, with doctors unable to explain the sudden changes in his vital signs. More concerning, hospital administrators were pushing to transfer him to the facility connected to Richard's brother, citing specialized equipment unavailable at the current location. They're isolating your father to increase pressure on you, Diane observed grimly. It's a tactic Richard has used before, creating health concerns to justify rapid business decisions. Imani made immediate arrangements for private medical security at her father's room. Former military medics now working in executive protection, with no connections to Richard's network. She also initiated preparations for an emergency medical transport to a facility outside Richard's sphere of influence. By evening, their counteroffensive was ready. The plan targeted multiple pressure points simultaneously: legal, media, regulatory, and corporate governance, creating a comprehensive exposure that Richard's network couldn't suppress through its usual tactics of isolated intimidation. As final preparations were underway, Miguel pulled Imani aside. There's something else you should know. Richard's discrimination system has a human cost beyond the humiliation of passengers like yourself. We've documented at least 50 career destructions. Employees terminated, blacklisted, and financially ruined for questioning the system. 3 former employees died by suicide after Richard's network destroyed their reputations and career prospects. Miguel handed her a memorial page with photographs. These are the casualties of fighting corporate discrimination. People who stood up and had everything taken from them. Their stories deserve to be told alongside the evidence. Imani studied the faces, diverse in age, race, and background, but united by their courage to question injustice. We'll make sure they're remembered. Their sacrifice won't be in vain. As night fell on the final hours before their counteroffensive launched, the Altitude Alliance gathered for a moment of reflection. These individuals had fought Richard's discrimination system for years, suffering professional destruction, financial hardship, and personal harassment without surrender. Whatever happens tomorrow, Diane told the assembled group, remember that standing against injustice is never a failure, even when the cost is high. Each of you chose integrity over comfort, equality over advantage. That choice matters regardless of the outcome. The room fell silent as each member contemplated the risks ahead. Their plan was sound, their evidence compelling, their coordination precise. But Richard Whitmore's network had proven devastatingly effective at crushing opposition. Tomorrow would determine whether corporate discrimination could operate, with impunity behind algorithms and euphemisms, or whether the courage of those willing to stand against injustice could finally expose the system for what it was. For Imani, the stakes transcended her personal humiliation, or even her father's company. This was about challenging a sophisticated infrastructure of exclusion that threatened to normalize discrimination across entire industries. It was about standing with those who had sacrificed everything to fight a system designed to preserve privilege while maintaining deniability. As the Alliance members departed for their final preparations, each took a different exit route to avoid detection. Their battle against Richard Whitmore's discrimination empire would begin at dawn. An asymmetric confrontation between a corporate power network and an underground resistance united by the simple belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. The darkest night had arrived, but morning would bring their moment of truth. Dawn broke over the city as Imani received confirmation that all elements of their counteroffensive were in position. The Altitude Alliance had worked through the night, coordinating their complex strategy against Richard Whitmore's discrimination empire. Now, as morning light filtered through windows, they prepared to execute the most comprehensive corporate accountability action in recent memory. Status report, Imani requested as Alliance members gathered in their command center. Media. Partners on standby across 6 platforms, Captain Williams confirmed. Simultaneous release scheduled for 10 a.m., synchronized with regulatory filings. Legal team ready, reported their attorney liaison. Catherine has prepared emergency injunctions to prevent document destruction, with judges in 3 jurisdictions ready to review on an expedited basis. Technical evidence secured and authenticated, Jason added. Backup copies distributed to secure locations in case of cyber countermeasures. Dr. Sharma monitored social media sentiment. Richard's team is already active, pushing positive stories about his emergency management of Skylight. They're calling it a rescue operation to save the airline from inexperienced ownership. Diane checked her secure phone. Marion confirms the board meeting is set for 11 a.m. Richard has prepared documentation claiming your father's health makes him permanently unfit to maintain ownership. They're positioning it as a compassionate intervention rather than a hostile takeover. Imani absorbed the information, mentally reviewing the complex counter-strategy they'd developed. And our board allies? 3 confirmed supporters if given evidence protection, Diane replied. 2 more potential if the public exposure creates sufficient pressure. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. At exactly 9 a.m., Catherine filed emergency legal petitions in federal court seeking protection for evidence and whistleblowers. Simultaneously, security teams hired by the Alliance secured physical documentation at key locations before it could be destroyed. At 9:30 a.m., Alliance members began strategically leaking verified incidents to social media influencers focused on corporate accountability and racial justice. Rather than a single explosive revelation that could be contained, they created dozens of smaller exposure points that collectively revealed the pattern of discrimination. By 10 a.m., prearranged media partners published their first wave of investigative pieces, not focused on allegations, but on the authenticated evidence from multiple sources showing how Elite Sky operated. Technical journalists decoded the algorithms, racial weighting factors. Business reporters analyzed the corporate structure designed to maintain deniability. Legal experts assessed the careful language crafted to avoid discrimination lawsuits while implementing biased policies. As this media barrage began, Imani and Catherine headed to Skylight headquarters for the board meeting, accompanied by 2 Alliance members with direct knowledge of Elite Sky operations. Their timing was deliberate, arriving precisely as the first wave of exposures hit the public consciousness, creating maximum disruption to Richard's carefully orchestrated takeover plan. In the executive parking garage, they spotted Richard Whitmore entering the building, surrounded by his usual entourage of legal and PR advisors. He walked with the confidence of someone certain of victory, unaware of the comprehensive operation, already undermining his position. He still thinks this is a conventional corporate battle, Catherine observed. He doesn't understand what he's facing. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Employees huddled around computer screens, whispering urgently as news alerts revealed aspects of Elite Sky's operations. Security personnel moved with heightened alertness, clearly responding to some emergency protocol. When they reached the EDI executive floor, Richard's assistant Marion met them with a carefully neutral expression, though her eyes conveyed a different message. The board is assembling in Conference Room A. Mr. Whitmore has requested a brief delay to address some breaking news items. I'm sure he has, Imani replied evenly. As they waited, Imani's phone buzzed with updates from the Alliance Command Center. Their strategy was working. The distributed nature of the exposures prevented Richard's network from containing the story through their usual tactics of legal threats and media relationships. Each revelation led to another, creating a cascading effect as journalists connected data points across platforms. Elite Sky Exposed was trending nationally, with passengers sharing their own experiences of discrimination that suddenly made sense within the context of a systematic program. Former employees, emboldened by the breaking story, began coming forward with additional testimony. Current Skylight staff were anonymously leaking internal messages, showing panic in middle management. At 10:45 a.m., Richard Whitmore emerged from a side office, his typically composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. He glanced at Imani with barely concealed hostility before composing himself. "Dr. Johnson, I understand you're here for the board meeting. Given the unusual circumstances this morning, perhaps we should speak privately first." "I think the board should hear what we all have to say together," Imani replied calmly. "Transparency seems appropriate, given recent revelations." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. These irresponsible news stories are presenting a distorted picture of standard industry practices. I've prepared a statement clarifying Skylight's commitment to inclusive service. Interesting timing for such a statement, Catherine noted. After years of implementing Elite Sky's discrimination algorithms, Richard's composure cracked further, his eyes darting to his assistant. "I'm not familiar with that program name. Perhaps you're confusing our premium journey protocols with something else." "I don't think so," Imani replied, producing a tablet displaying internal documents with Richard's signature. These implementation guidelines for Elite Sky's passenger profiling system seem quite specific about demographic targeting in premium cabins. Before Richard could respond, the board members began arriving for the meeting, many looking disturbed by the morning's revelations. Some avoided eye contact with Richard, creating distance that hadn't existed the previous day. The power dynamic was visibly shifting as evidence mounted across public channels. Richard attempted to regain control as the meeting began, presenting his prepared narrative about temporary leadership necessitated by health concerns. But his usual commanding presence faltered as board members raised uncomfortable questions about the morning's news reports. "Before we continue with the leadership discussion," Imani intervened, "I believe the board deserves complete information about what Elite Sky actually is and how it has operated under Mr. Whitmore's guidance." For the next 30 minutes, Imani and the Alliance representatives presented irrefutable evidence of the discrimination system. Internal documents, algorithm specifications, training materials with coded language, statistical analyses showing clear demographic impacts, and testimony from former employees who had been silenced. As they spoke, Catherine distributed legal analyses showing potential liability under multiple civil rights statutes, with preliminary damage estimates that made several board members visibly pale. This company has been operating a sophisticated system of racial and body size discrimination disguised as premium experience management, Imani concluded. The legal, financial, and reputational consequences will be catastrophic unless immediate corrective action is taken. Richard attempted to regain control, dismissing the evidence as selective interpretation of standard industry practices. But his counter-arguments grew increasingly desperate as board members' questions became more pointed. The turning point came when Marion, Richard's own assistant, stood up unexpectedly. "I can confirm the authenticity of these documents," she stated clearly. "I personally processed Mr. Whitmore's approvals for Elite Sky implementation across all premium cabins, including the demographic targeting parameters." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You're fired," he spat, "and you'll never work in this industry again. I'll make sure of it." "That sounds remarkably like a threat of retaliation against a whistleblower," Catherine observed, recording the exchange. In front of multiple witnesses, including board members with fiduciary responsibility. As Richard realized his error, his carefully maintained facade crumbled completely. "You have no idea what you're doing," he snarled at Imani. "This airline operates in a competitive industry with specific customer expectations. Premium cabins have standards that certain passengers simply don't meet." "What specific standards would those be, Mr. Whitmore?" Imani asked calmly, knowing his answer could be devastating. Richard seemed to catch himself, but the damage was done. His implicit bias had broken through the carefully constructed corporate language. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances, recognizing the potential testimony he had just delivered. Outside the boardroom, the situation was deteriorating, further for Richard's network. Alliance members had timed secondary media releases to coincide with the board meeting, revealing how Elite Sky methodology was being licensed to other premium service industries through Richard's consulting firm. Regulatory agencies were announcing preliminary investigations based on the morning's revelations. A class action lawsuit representing discriminated passengers had been filed with over 50 initial plaintiffs. Current Skylight employees were staging impromptu protests in multiple airports, demanding accountability. As these updates filtered into the boardroom via urgent messages to board members, the momentum shifted definitively. Richard's temporary leadership proposal was tabled indefinitely. Instead, the board established an emergency oversight committee to investigate Elite Sky and implement immediate corrective measures. Richard, seeing his control slipping away, made a final desperate attempt to reassert authority. This is a coordinated attack by incompetent new ownership trying to explain away their inability to maintain our premium standards. The Johnson acquisition was a mistake that will destroy everything we've built. What exactly have you built, Mr. Whitmore? Imani asked quietly. A system that humiliates passengers based on their race and body size? An algorithm that automates discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability? Is that the legacy you're so desperate to protect? When Richard lunged toward her, his composure completely shattered. Security personnel intervened immediately. The physical intimidation attempt, witnessed by the entire board, was the final nail in his professional coffin. By meeting's end, Richard Whitmore had been suspended pending investigation. The board had authorized full cooperation with regulatory inquiries and established an ethics review committee with external oversight. Most significantly, they had formally reaffirmed Marcus Johnson's ownership authority and requested Imani's leadership in implementing corporate reforms. As Richard was escorted from the building, still shouting threats about consequences for those who had betrayed him, Imani received word that his broader network was already beginning to fracture. Companies that had implemented his premium-y journey optimization systems were announcing internal reviews. Business partners were distancing themselves from his methodology. The carefully constructed empire of acceptable discrimination was collapsing under the weight of public exposure. By day's end, the Altitude Alliance's comprehensive strategy had achieved what years of individual resistance could not: a complete exposure of systematic discrimination that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence irrefutable, and the consequences unavoidable. As Imani left Skylight headquarters that evening, employees who had witnessed the day's events nodded respectfully or whispered thanks. Many had silently opposed Elite Sky's practices, but feared the consequences of speaking out. Now, with Richard's power broken and new leadership committed to reform, they could finally acknowledge the discriminatory system they had been forced to implement. The battle wasn't over. Richard's network extended beyond one airline, and systems of discrimination didn't disappear overnight. But a critical breakthrough had been achieved. The carefully constructed veil of deniability had been pierced, revealing the deliberate, systematic nature of what had previously been dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. For Imani, the day's victory transcended corporate politics or personal vindication. It represented a fundamental challenge to how discrimination operated in modern contexts, not through explicit bigotry, but through sophisticated systems that produced biased outcomes while maintaining plausible deniability. Elite Sky had been exposed not just as an airline policy, but as a template for how discrimination could be algorithmic, systematic, and hidden behind corporate language, while still causing real harm to real people. As night fell on this pivotal day, Imani called her father's hospital room with the news of their victory. For the first time since her humiliation in that first-class cabin, she felt the weight beginning to lift. The system that had been designed to exclude people like her was finally facing accountability. The journey toward true corporate transformation was just beginning, but today had proven an essential truth. When people united against injustice, even at great personal risk, they could challenge systems that once seemed too powerful to confront. 3 weeks after the exposure of Elite Sky, Imani stood at the podium in Skylight's main conference room, surveying the assembled executives, board members, and media representatives. The company had entered a new era, one focused on accountability, transformation, and genuine inclusivity rather than superficial corporate language. The changes had been swift and comprehensive. Richard Whitmore and 12 senior executives involved in Elite Sky had been terminated with cause. Vanessa, Brett, and other frontline enforcers of discriminatory practices faced both corporate discipline and potential civil litigation. The board had undergone significant restructuring, with new diverse members bringing fresh perspectives to leadership. Most importantly, Marcus Johnson had recovered sufficiently to resume his role as owner, though an investigation into his suspicious medical complications continued. His first official act had been to appoint Imani as chief ethics officer with a mandate to transform the company culture from its discriminatory foundation to a model of inclusive excellence. Today marks not just a new policy or a rebranding exercise, Imani began her address. It represents a fundamental reconception of what premium service actually means. True excellence doesn't come from exclusion or creating artificial hierarchies of human worth. It comes from treating every person with dignity and respect while providing exceptional service to all. Behind her stood the allies who had made this transformation possible. Catherine Parker, now heading Skylight's legal team with a focus on passenger rights. Jeremiah, reinstated with a promotion to flight services manager. Diane Miller returning as executive vice president of inclusive customer experience. And dozens of former Alliance members now integrated into the company's new ethics infrastructure. Elite Sky was never about service quality, Imani continued. It was about preserving spaces where certain passengers wouldn't have to encounter people who looked different from them. It used sophisticated technology and corporate language to implement discrimination while maintaining deniability. Today, we're replacing that system with transparent, equitable practices that define premium service by what we provide, not who we exclude. The transformation extended beyond policy changes. Skylight had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff, established anonymous reporting systems with robust whistleblower protections, and created external oversight committees to monitor company practices. Most revolutionary was the new Inclusive Excellence framework that replaced Elite Sky's algorithms with systems designed to identify and eliminate bias. Rather than tracking demographic comfort factors, the new analytics focused on ensuring all passengers received consistent high-quality service, regardless of appearance or background. The story of what happened to me in first class was never just about one humiliating incident, Imani explained to the assembled media. It revealed a systemic problem that affected countless passengers who never knew why they received poor treatment or felt unwelcome in premium spaces. Many simply blamed themselves or accepted discrimination as normal. Today we acknowledge that harm and commit to fundamental change. The airline's transformation was already showing promising results. Initial data indicated higher satisfaction scores across all passenger demographics as discriminatory practices were eliminated. Employee morale had improved dramatically as staff were freed from implementing biased protocols. Even financial metrics were trending positive as the company's authentic commitment to inclusion resonated with travelers tired of superficial corporate diversity claims. The impact extended far beyond one airline. Richard Whitmore's consulting firm had collapsed as clients rushed to distance themselves from his methodologies. Companies that had implemented variations of Elite Sky were conducting urgent internal reviews. The entire premium service industry was re-examining practices that had normalized exclusion under the guise of customer experience management. Criminal investigations into Richard's network continued, revealing disturbing connections to other discriminatory systems. His algorithmic approach had influenced everything from retail customer service protocols to banking accessibility to healthcare resource allocation, creating invisible barriers that disproportionately affected minorities and plus-sized individuals while maintaining technical deniability. As these broader implications unfolded, Imani focused on ensuring Skylight's transformation was genuine and sustainable. The company established the most comprehensive anti-discrimination monitoring system in the industry, with both internal metrics and external auditing to prevent backsliding. Jeremiah had been instrumental in this effort, helping design reporting, systems that empowered employees to identify problematic practices without fear of retaliation. His personal experience as a whistleblower informed protections that made it safer for staff to prioritize ethics over misguided loyalty. "Today we're releasing our transparency commitment," Imani announced to the media. Skylight will publish quarterly reports on service quality metrics across passenger demographics, making our performance publicly accountable. "We're establishing an independent passenger advocacy board with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend changes." Catherine Parker's legal team had simultaneously been working with passengers affected by Elite Sky. Rather than fighting discrimination claims, the company had established a reconciliation process that acknowledged harm, offered appropriate compensation, and most importantly, incorporated affected passengers' input into reform efforts. The most powerful element of the transformation was a first-person account of Imani's experience, now used as a training case study for all airlines. It detailed not just the obvious humiliation of being publicly removed from first class, but the subtle indignities throughout the experience, the different treatment from staff, the selective enforcement of policies, the systematic efforts to make certain passengers feel unwelcome in premium spaces. Discrimination doesn't always announce itself with explicit slurs or obvious exclusion, Imani explained in the training materials. Modern discrimination often operates through systems, algorithms, and selective enforcement of seemingly neutral policies. The harm is just as real, but the deniability is built into the process. 6 months after the Elite Sky exposure, Skylight's transformation had become a business school case study in corporate culture change. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs across all demographic groups. Employee retention had improved dramatically as staff embraced a mission of genuine service excellence rather than discriminatory exclusion. Most significantly, the diverse leadership team had built what industry analysts were now calling the most inclusive airline in the industry. Former critics became advocates as they experienced the tangible differences in service quality and corporate values. On the anniversary of her humiliating first-class incident, Imani boarded a Skylight flight as an executive, greeted by Jeremiah, now a flight manager overseeing service standards across the airline. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. Where once stood Vanessa with her discriminatory sneer, now stood a diverse flight crew, welcoming passengers of all backgrounds with genuine respect. "Our premium experience training has completely changed," Jeremiah explained as they toured the aircraft. "Instead of coded language about passenger types and cabin atmosphere, we focus on actual service quality metrics, response times, problem resolution, accommodation of diverse needs." The first-class cabin that had once been Richard Whitmore's showcase for exclusion now reflected the company's transformed values. Passengers of all sizes, races, and backgrounds received consistently excellent service. The seats themselves had been redesigned for greater comfort and accessibility. Most importantly, the subtle signals of exclusion, the differential treatment, the coded language, the selective enforcement of policies, had been eliminated through comprehensive accountability systems. "The most powerful change isn't in our policies," Imani observed as they discussed the transformation. "It's in our metrics. We now track service quality consistency across demographic factors. If certain passengers receive different treatment, the data reveals it immediately." This approach, measuring outcome equity rather than relying on policy statements, had proven revolutionary. It prevented discrimination from hiding behind corporate language or individual discretion. The system that had once used algorithms to enforce exclusion now used data analytics to ensure inclusion. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Imani reflected on the journey that had transformed both a company and an industry. What began as a humiliating personal experience had revealed a sophisticated discrimination system that had operated with impunity for years. By exposing Elite Sky's methodology, they had challenged not just one airline's practices, but an entire approach to acceptable discrimination, masked as premium service standards. Marcus Johnson joined her for the flight's second leg, his health finally fully restored. His pride in his daughter's leadership was evident as they discussed the company's transformation. "What you've built here goes beyond corporate reform," he noted. You've created a template for identifying and dismantling sophisticated discrimination systems that hide behind algorithms and corporate language. Indeed, the Johnson Standards, as they were now known throughout the industry, had become a framework for authentic inclusion in service environments. Other airlines were adopting similar transparency metrics and accountability systems. Regulatory agencies were incorporating the lessons of Elite Sky into compliance guidelines. Business schools were studying the case as an example of how discrimination evolved in corporate contexts and how it could be systematically addressed. For the passengers who had experienced Elite Sky's discrimination, the transformation offered long overdue validation. Their complaints hadn't been oversensitivity or misunderstandings. They had been legitimate responses to a deliberate system designed to make them feel unwelcome while maintaining plausible deniability. The most important lesson, Imani explained in her keynote address to the National Corporate Ethics Conference, is understanding how discrimination adapts to cultural and legal constraints. Elite Sky represented the evolution of bias, from explicit exclusion to algorithmic sorting, from overt slurs to coded corporate language, from individual prejudice to systematic processing. This insight had implications far beyond one airline. As companies increasingly relied on algorithms and data-driven decision-making, the potential for bias to hide within technical systems grew exponentially. The Skylight case provided a roadmap for identifying and addressing these sophisticated discrimination mechanisms. As the anniversary flight landed, Imani was met by Catherine Parker, whose legal advocacy had been crucial in the company's transformation. Together, they had established the Corporate Accountability Initiative, an independent organization dedicated to exposing discrimination systems in other industries. Richard's network extended beyond airlines, Catherine reminded her as they left the terminal. Elite Sky was just one implementation of his methodology. There are similar systems operating in hotels, financial services, healthcare, and retail, all using the same approach of algorithmic discrimination with corporate deniability. This broader challenge remained. Though Richard Whitmore himself had been disgraced, his discriminatory methodology had spread throughout premium service industries. Dismantling these interconnected systems would require the same comprehensive approach that had exposed Elite Sky, gathering evidence across multiple points, identifying patterns invisible in isolated incidents, and creating accountability, mechanisms that measured outcomes rather than intentions. For Imani, the work continued. The transformation of Skylight represented an important victory, but also the beginning of a larger mission. Modern discrimination had evolved beyond the obvious forms addressed by existing laws and regulations. It operated through systems, algorithms, and selective enforcement, creating harm while maintaining deniability. As she looked across the terminal at passengers of all backgrounds being treated with equal respect and dignity, Imani felt both pride in what they had accomplished and determination about the challenges ahead. The flight that had begun with her humiliation had launched a journey toward more fundamental change, not just in one airline's practices, but in how discrimination was understood and addressed in corporate environments. The lesson of Elite Sky was that bias could hide behind corporate language, technological systems, and plausible deniability. But it could also be exposed and dismantled through collective action, data-driven accountability, and moral courage. That understanding would guide the ongoing work of ensuring that true premium service meant excellence for everyone, not exclusion for some. As Skylight entered its second year of transformation, the airline that had once epitomized sophisticated discrimination had become a model for authentic inclusion. The company's new motto captured this evolution perfectly. Excellence isn't who we exclude, it's how we serve everyone. For Imani Johnson, who had once stood humiliated as a champagne glass shattered at her feet in first class, this transformation represented more than corporate reform. It was proof that systems designed to make certain people feel they didn't belong could be dismantled and replaced with something that recognized the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of their appearance or background. That was the true meaning of first class. The story of Imani Johnson's battle against Elite Sky demonstrates powerful truths about modern discrimination and how to fight it. First, racism often hides behind corporate language, algorithms, and policy enforcement that maintains plausible deniability while causing real harm. What appears as an isolated incident is frequently part of a systematic approach to exclusion. Second, challenging these systems requires collective action. Imani succeeded not because she fought alone, but because she united with the Altitude Alliance, people who had been documenting the discrimination for years. When isolated complaints are dismissed, collective evidence reveals the undeniable pattern. Third, technology has created new ways for discrimination to operate while evading traditional detection. Algorithms that sort people by premium suitability scores can implement bias while their creators maintain plausible deniability. We must examine outcomes, not just stated intentions. Fourth, true transformation requires changing metrics, not just policies. Skylight's revolution came not from new policy statements, but from measuring whether all passengers actually received equal treatment, regardless of appearance. Data can either enforce discrimination or ensure accountability. Finally, we must recognize how discrimination evolves to adapt to cultural and legal constraints. Elite Sky represented sophisticated bias, operating through systems rather than slurs, using corporate language instead of explicit exclusion. Identifying these evolved forms requires looking beyond individual interactions to the patterns they create collectively. The most important lesson is that even well-established discriminatory systems can be dismantled when people with moral courage stand together, document patterns, and demand genuine accountability. Change is possible when we refuse to accept that some people deserve less dignity than others. Have you ever experienced discrimination disguised as policy or standard procedure? Has someone ever made you feel like you didn't belong in a space you had every right to be in? Share your story in the comments below, as your experience might help others recognize these patterns in their own lives. If this story opened your eyes to how modern discrimination can hide behind corporate language and sophisticated systems, hit that like button and subscribe for more eye-opening narratives that expose uncomfortable truths. How would you have responded in Imani's position? Would you have revealed your identity immediately or gathered evidence like she did? Comment 1 if you would have exposed yourself right away, or 2 if you would have followed Imani's approach of documentation first. Thank you for joining us for this journey from humiliation to transformation. Remember that every time we stand against discrimination, whether obvious or disguised, we help create a world where true excellence means treating everyone with dignity, not excluding those who don't fit someone's narrow definition of who belongs.